Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now today we're going to tackle the Valhallan Ice Warriors, but I hear you say immediately, that's not a Valhallan. This actually comes to me via a group called Reptilian Overlords. Now this is not a paid promotion, I just found these guys and thought their stuff was awesome. You can either pick up their parts from their website, you can buy squads that they have made and what have you. I'll link to that in the description below. Or if you happen to have a 3D printer, you can actually cruise along to their Patreon, subscribe there, and grab a bunch of STL files for some of their stuff, which is what I've done in this case. Now, the Valhallans are an army that have existed for a long time in the Astra Militarum, and they're included as rules and options in the latest codex, but unfortunately Games Workshop doesn't do any miniatures for them anymore. They are a very cool, classic army. And I think it's a shame that there isn't really an option if you want to go purely Games Workshop. But if you're playing a lot of games at home or at a club with your mates, and you're not too fussed about where the miniatures come from, you don't have to worry about whether or not it's quote-unquote official, these are a really good option. I'll also take the opportunity to quickly shout out both Anvil Industries and Victoria Miniatures, both of whom I will link down below. Again, if you're looking for variant guard parts for a Valhallan-themed army, they will also look very cool too. But without any further mucking around, let's have a look at how I painted this guy, and I tell you, it is pretty simple. Now I've started off by giving this guy a prime of Corax White, and as you can see, that actually makes this quite difficult to see. So what we're going to do first is twofold. We're going to Agrax Earthshade him, because that's going to be the first stage for, actually painting his jacket. And we're going to do it over the whole model because it will actually make some of these details a little easier to see when we paint them in later. So I've got a medium shade brush. You can use any old brush you like for this, to be honest. If you've got a bigger one that you like, all the better. But all I've done is shaken up my Agrax Earthshade, and let's get in there and cover the whole model in a quick coat of this. So take your time, make sure that you are getting it into all of the recesses. It will stand out and look a little peculiar if you don't, so be careful with it. Just fill in the whole model. Now once he's had plenty of time to dry, I left this dude for about 30 to 40 minutes. This is what you'll have, and you'll see it's brought out all of the nice deep recess shading, and we can see much more clearly what we're actually working with here, which is nice. Now as well, obviously we don't want his coat to actually be brown. So what we're going to do now is to overbrush it with Ulthuan Grey. Now this works best if you're going to use a flat brush. I've got one here. This came from the stationery, stationery aisle in a local drugstore sort of thing. You could use a dry brush or anything really, as long as it's flat. I tend to find flat brushes work best for this. Now we are truly dry brushing. Overbrushing is a similar sort of technique, but what you want to do is kind of cover most of the area with your original color again. So this is a little difficult, depending which angle you're looking at. But all you want to do is build up the color in the same way that you would if you were dry brushing, but you want to go over most of the area. So rather than just catching the high points, we want to cover most of the flat areas too, and leave behind only the stuff that's in the recesses. Now when you're painting a model like this, for example, which has a lot of detail, sort of going down, obviously the way the coat works, instead of painting up and down like that, you want to paint across these areas of detail. Okay, so you're trying not to fill them in. So take your time. If you do need to go back over, you can build this color up. So for example, on the sleeve here, I'm going to switch my motion to up and down so that I'm not filling in that groove on his sleeve. But let's come back and have a look what it looks like once we've whitened this back up again. Now after a couple of passes, this is what we've got. And you'll see we've got most of the flat areas of the coat, leaving the recesses all shaded with our Agrax Earthshade. Now, you may find some areas that this does go a little bit grainy. Particularly in my case, this is because my poor pot of Ulthuan Grey is on its last legs. So if you do have any areas that you want to spruce up a little bit, or that you might just have not been able to get at all with your brush, you can quickly get in with a medium layer brush, a little bit of water, and smooth some of those areas out. This is a purely optional step. I'm doing it because I like some of these areas to be a little bit more smooth, but you might like the grainy look. This is really a matter of personal taste here. So see this little gap here, I want to fill that in because that should be, there we go, one nice smooth area. Now you can see with that tidied up, things look a little bit smoother, and I quite like how that looks. What I would suggest though is if you're doing an army of these guys and you're painting 120 conscripts, don't bother, skip that step of the tidy up. But it means you can very quickly sort of pick up your officers and sergeants and what have you if you want them to look a little more tidy, but that's up to you. What we are going to do now though is a proper dry brush, and I've got my big dry brush and some Praxetti white. What we're going to do is following the similar sort of shape, just looking to catch the very edges and some high points of the model. So just flick along quite lightly. You'll notice this doesn't show up very well, especially not on camera, which is struggling a little. But all you need to do is go around a couple of times, throw your model violently to the table, and you will notice that this does build up some white edges, which is quite cool. Now it's up to you in what order you do the rest of the details on the model, but I'd suggest, because they're normally wearing these quite close-in helmets or a shunk or whatever, the easiest part to do next is going to be the face and hands. So I've got here Cadian flesh tone, and this should go on quite simply because we're working from a nice bright base coat. So just bob a little bit on there, fill in his face, and up to you if you want to do his hands with bare hands or gloves. Really your call. I'm going to do him with hands though. Bare hands, bark, bark. Bears don't bark. Now while that's drying, we can go ahead and do his webbing and pouches. And for that I'm going to go to a nice dark color. We'll put some contrast on him here. So I've got, this is Rhinox hide. Just a little bit of water in my paint as usual to make sure it flows off my brush. And let's just fill in all of the leather details. Now some of his webbing, like for example this big pouch on his side here, I'm not going to do that as dark as the leather details. I want to do that to look like it's a fabric. So I'm going to do that later. I'll show you what that looks like. Now with those leather straps and pouches done, I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab for any fabric details. So this pouch here, for example, and if you wanted to paint their gloves, you could use Steel Legion Drab too. Some of these guys, the heads, you'll notice they've got like scarves or little mufflers up on their faces. This as well, perfectly fine color for that. Now with his skin dry, we can finish off the rest of the details on his hat. So I've got a little Rakarth flesh, and I'm going to use this to fill in just the fluffy bits. I hesitate to call it wool if we're thinking of the 41st millennium. You'd never know exactly what animal this might have come from. And I'm pretty sure groks don't have wool, so whatever it is, Rakarth's flesh will do the job here. And then for the actual body of his Ushanka, or if he's wearing the Pilotka, the side cap, I've got here Deathguard Green. Now I'd suggest if you wanted to do the turnbacks on his coat, like the backs of his sleeves or the inside of his coat, maybe paint this in the same green. Any helmets, for example, I would do that a darker shade of green. And to kind of go with this, I'd probably use something like Castellan green. Really a matter of personal preference, as any painting is. But I think this one's going to look pretty cool. And now to paint some wooden details, we have got Mournfang Brown. Now this, of course, is not an AK-47. It comes from space. But, you might choose to paint one in any old color scheme you like. So, bit of wood there. Don't forget handles on these potato mashers. I could do with a little more water in my paint, I think. And then we can fill in any areas that we want to be black. Now for this, I'm actually using Vallejo's Flat Black. You can use Abaddon Black, but I think I've mentioned a few times on the channel, just for the coverage, I do prefer Vallejo's Black to Abaddon Black. Abaddon Black does dry with a slightly nicer sort of semi-satin sheen to it. It's all a matter of personal taste in that respect. So take your time, Fill in these black spots now. And then finally, any metal details you want to do, I'm going to use Iron Hand Steel. Now, you might want to use Lead Belcher if you've already got it. I tend to find Iron Hand Steel being that little bit brighter means I don't have to highlight it if I don't want to. So, matter of personal preference there. As always, this little icon on his helmet, you could, so his hat, you could paint it in gold or maybe a bone color or what have you, but let's just do silver dots here and there where we want a little bit more sci-fi look. Geez, I can't figure out where to hold my hands today. Now once you've finished all of those base coats, it's time to go back to Agrax Earthshade. What I've got here, this is one of my size 2 brushes from Redgrass Games. I like this one because it's got just a little bit more bristles. A little bit more? How does one say that? Never mind. Anyway, point being, I'm going to load my brush up, and this one keeps a really nice tip, so I have quite a bit of control over where this shade is going to go. What we'll do is shade over all of the areas that we have done those base coats on, but we want to avoid splashing our nice white coat again. So, fairly simple this. You could stick to a medium layer brush if that's what you've got and you want to stay with one brush. But whatever the case, just take your time, and all of the areas that we have done these base coats on, give them a quick coat of Agrax Earthshade. Now once those are all dry, you could base them up and put them on the table straight away. I think we tend to overthink the amount of work we put into the Imperial Guard, You're painting for spectacle, guys. Not everything has to be perfect. But if there is one thing, I think, if you're going to highlight anything, go for the face. So I've got here just a little bit of Kislev flesh, and I'm going to do his nose, bottom lip, do across his brow, and just the back of his knuckles. Alright, and all those other details are going to seem a bit cooler for just that little amount of work. Now, if you do want to highlight the rest of them and you're looking for recommendations on what colors to use, I would genuinely recommend go ahead and pick up the Citadel Paint app. It's free and it is actually a very useful tool. But I'm not going to bother. We're painting 120 conscripts. What I am going to do though is show you something cool, and I've got it sort of lurking in my hand here. This is a popsicle stick. I've got just a little bit of foam from a blister pack. I think it was a US mortar team from Warlord, but however you get it, I've just glued it around the edge here. What I'm going to do is dab that into a little bit of dryad bark. I don't want to use the same color that I have for my webbing. You'll see why in a second. So let's get some splotches. So we're getting nice random patterns. And then what I'm going to do is just lightly dab along the edge of his coat here. And we'll get some random flicky bits of dirt, muck, and what have you. So I'd suggest go around all of the base of his coat, concentrate towards the bottom of it, but don't hesitate to flick up just a little bit. And you can build up as much of this in areas that you think would see a little bit more muck and dirt. So for example, down the bottom at the front here, it's a little difficult when this is not an actual brush, But what you do is just get in and bip, 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 bip. There we go. Now, here comes the cool part. So while the muck that is in your brush is still mostly wet, get a little bit of Steel Legion Drab, bip, 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 follow them in the same procedure, and just randomly add to some of those areas. You don't want to completely cover the dark brown, but you want some of this mud to look fresher. That's what our Steel Legion Drab is going to do. Now there you have some quick and easy muck and grime using pretty much the same technique as if you were to do it on a tank. So what I'm going to do now is quickly knock a base on him. I have covered winter basing in a previous video with Imperial Guard, so I'll link to that at the end of the video, but let's quickly get a look. What does he look like when he's all in context with his nice frosty base? Now with his base finished off like that, our Valhallan soldier is complete. Now, to be completely honest, I did also grab a little bit of Screaming Skull and just dotted in the front of the wool on his Ushanka here, and I did highlight as well his pouch there. I thought they looked a lot better for just a little bit more work. That was just Baneblade Brown, like I said, Screaming Skull. But after that, I've given them a quick spray varnish so that it'll stand up to a little highlighting, a little bit of handling, sorry, and I think that looks pretty cool. Anyhow, without mucking around anymore, there you go. That is how to do that one. And I would recommend as well that this works perfectly well, no matter what kind of, greatcoat themed, winter themed army you're doing. So the Mud Spatter, for example, also works very well if you're doing a Krieg army. Starting from white and all works. If you're doing, even with regular Cadians, you might find that works pretty well. But that's up for you to try out. I just really like the look of these miniatures, and I knew I had to do something with these Reptilian Overlords parts. Show you guys just something I thought was really cool. So as always, feel free guys, drop a comment in the old box below. My Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, and you guys enjoy the rest of your day.